I can go first since I'm sitting here.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Hi, yeah, it's great to be here. My name is Bryn. I am a first-year master's student in the graduate degree program of ecology, but I did my undergraduate here as well. So I graduated with a bachelor's of science in ecosystem science and sustainability, and I also double majored in geography. So I've taken a couple classes with Beth. That's how we kind of got to know each other. But yeah, right now I'm looking into, I do forest biogeography and disturbance ecology. So I look at subalpine systems and how beetle and fire interact to shape seed dispersal capacity of the landscape and then subsequent recovery and resilience of our forest systems following disturbances. So yeah. It's a little low down on me.
All right, thank you. Lauren, why don't we have you go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am Lauren. I graduated from CSU last year with my master's in ecosystem sustainability. Beth was on my thesis committee and I TA'd for her. And then prior to that, I'm actually from Virginia. So I went to William and Mary for undergrad, where I studied biology and environmental science, and now I work in urban forestry.
Great, thank you. And Julianne.
Hi, my name is Jillian. I followed a really similar path to Bryn. So I got my master's in the graduate degree program in ecology back in 2020. And I also got my bachelor's at CSU as well in ecosystem science and sustainability in 2018. And my master's research was mostly focused on mapping emergent aquatic vegetation in Minnesota, but I'm sure I'll talk with you guys a bit more about that later. So.
All right, thank you. So now, I guess specifically for Jillian and Lauren, since you are out there now in the real world, what are your current jobs? So Lauren, you mentioned you do urban forestry now. Can you just say a few words about that? And then Jillian, you can go next.
Sure. Yeah, I work for the City and County of Denver and their Office of the City Forester. I'm on their programs team. So we run a few different programs, mostly dealing with tree planting and removal, and then removal and replacement programs as well.
And then my current job is with a company called Applied Analysis Solutions, and I'm a geospatial scientist. So our company does consulting with a few different clients. Some of them are related more to pesticides and mapping endangered species and looking at how pesticide concentrations overlap in endangered species habitat. And then I've got a different suite of projects that I work on with a client who is in Germany, and it's with Bayer Ag. So again, kind of working at the pesticide aspect of it, but I do some mapping of grassland areas for them, as well as overall contributions to a larger project that's looking at bee forage and modeling bee populations and how they move throughout Europe. So I get a bit of diversity between all the different clients that we have, which is something that I really like about being in a consulting company now.
Very cool. All right, so I have a handful of seed questions to get us started. But if anyone has any pressing questions, like you're dying to know something, you can just raise your hand. Or if you are online, we have a few online now, you can put it into the chat and I'll monitor that. No one's raising their hand yet, so I will start. Okay, number one, and so I'll just pick a name and then we can kind of round robin it. How did you, so talking about your graduate research, how did you or do you still use GIS and geospatial science in your grad research? So Bryn, why don't you go for that?
Yeah, no, I use GIS all the time, literally all the time. I actually started as a research assistant with my advisor, my current advisor, doing research work, doing like GIS and remote sensing, mapping dense horizontal cover, all of that jazz. And now I use it to basically figure out my methods for this summer. We're going to be doing field research this summer. And so I've created a seed dispersal model that I was using to inform my thesis work about where we're going to be putting out seed traps. But I also plan on building off of that model after we get actual data, so that we can have a more realistic ground truth model that we can actually use for management and stuff like that. So yeah, I use GIS pretty consistently.
All right, and Lauren.
So my graduate research was in urban ecology broadly, and I was looking at the impact of land cover around single family homes on cooling electricity consumption, so like air conditioning use. So I basically used GIS for that whole project, running like many iterations of like buffer tool around single family homes and analyzing the land cover within those buffers to get a bunch of like percent land cover. So I was specifically interested in like tree canopy and impervious surfaces and the impact that those different land cover types had on cooling electricity use on single family homes. So that was my research. And then now at my job, I don't use it as much, but I'm sure we'll get into this too more in like professional and applied, but I use it a little bit. So it's a good tool to have that's transferred into the professional world as well.
Thanks, Lauren. So I pretty much decided that I wanted to keep very much a spatial focus throughout my master's research. So joining the ecology program means that gives me an application for all these different GIS tools and remote sensing tools. Remote sensing was really the area I wanted to focus on the most, and it's something I've still been pursuing today. So with mapping emergent aquatic vegetation across Minnesota, I got to bring together different GIS data sets that were collected by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And so that is mostly polygon and point data, converting their polygons to point data to use as training samples and models. And then I got to employ a bunch of different satellite imagery, primarily Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2. And I used something called, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with synthetic aperture radar or SAR, but that is the Sentinel-1 satellite. And so I used that and the variance in the backscatter of synthetic aperture radar to pick up on some different spectral signatures of emergent aquatic vegetation. So I did that statewide, and then also kind of investigated some different drivers of a few particular species of interest in Minnesota. So wild rice is a very important species to the indigenous folks there, and it's also a really big part of Minnesota's economy. So they were, the DNR was more interested in learning about why wild rice was declining in certain areas and learning about population dynamics. So I got to employ a bunch of different GIS data sets, from like flow line data and working with more hydrologic data sets, all the way to some different agricultural and crop statistics data sets, harmonizing all of those to tease apart what are the influences on wild rice populations. So it was something that I integrated throughout my whole research process, but it really came down to asking spatial questions and choosing to investigate those spatial questions instead of purely ecological focused questions. Combining those two was a fine line to walk. And I use GIS and remote sensing pretty consistently throughout my work now too. So it's played a big role in everything I've been interested in during graduate school all the way up through this point.
Very cool, thank you. So thinking still about grad school, how did you find your grad program? Like, did you have a project in mind and you found someone who would take you on, or was there a project that was advertised and you applied to grad school and it just aligned that way? Like, how did you fall into your current position? So we'll go backwards this time. We'll go Jillian first.
Well,
what was your path to?
I really just thought that I wanted to do something a little bit more. I wasn't quite sure that I had pulled everything I needed to out of my undergraduate degree and thought I wanted to continue on with school. So when I first took remote sensing as a course in the ESS program, I got really excited about all the potential there and thought maybe I wanted to switch my major to forestry. Decided to spend a bit more time talking with that professor who's not at CSU anymore, but Mike Volkowski. So I really just talked with him, and he showed me some paths to try and find some different internships. I really expressed my interest early on with him, and when he realized he was going to have room for some additional graduate students right about the time I was expected to graduate, he kind of brought me into his lab. So I spent my final year of undergrad working with the folks in his lab, learning how to do some of these more, I guess, more difficult spatial processes and working with larger data sets, learning a bit more in depth with R coding and how to for loop. So that job really helped prepare me, and Mike really decided that he had a couple projects lined up, but it happened that he left at the same time that I started graduate school. So he brought in Jody Vogler as his replacement. So there wasn't a specific project that I was supposed to work on at that point. So it was really piecing funding together as I went, but I came in with a specific project, which was mapping emergent aquatic vegetation in Minnesota, because I did the NASA Develop program for 3 consecutive terms during my undergraduate degree. And I really fell in love with that project when I was working on it. So I decided to continue doing that work because I saw a lot of potential with it and making those maps better. So I elected to keep working on that project, but really it just came down to expressing my interest and finding a professor I really enjoyed and sticking with them. And that was really how I found my way into GDPE.
Cool. And Lauren?
So I took 4 years off between undergrad and grad school. I always thought I wanted to go to grad school when I finished undergrad, but I just wasn't really sure what. So I did all sorts of things in those 4 years. I lived abroad. I worked for the EPA in DC. And then I ultimately landed at a small nonprofit in Denver that did urban forestry. And it was something that really resonated with me. I really liked the field because I liked how it incorporated ecology and then the human component. And then it's like very interdisciplinary. So I spent 2 years there, and then I kind of felt like I was at my threshold, like I wasn't growing. And so that's when I started looking into grad school, and I was looking for professors and labs that were doing urban forestry, urban ecology research. And I stumbled across Melissa McHale, who was at CSU at the time. She's at UBC now in Vancouver, but really resonated with her research. So I reached out to her, set up a meeting, and all just kind of springboarded from there. Was a good fit, and she was willing to take on another student similar to Jillian. It was kind of like piecemealing funding together. I thought I would have one project in mind, and that kind of changed and evolved when I was at CSU with what data was available. But yeah, it just kind of happened once I found someone that was willing to take me on, and I liked their research, just kind of went from there. And then once you find a professor or lab willing to take you on, you're kind of like in. It's not really like you have to. The application process isn't that scary or anything. So that was at least my experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, very similar. Not to Lauren, but I graduated from my undergrad and went straight into grad school. I had known my advisor beforehand. I took a biogeography class with him my sophomore year. And at that point, I wasn't a geography major, but I just like fell in love with that and just spatial thinking. And so I ended up adding on my geography major. And then I was just continuing my degree and doing some work outside, just normal, boring Sierra trading post. It was great. But yeah, he ended up reaching out to me because I showed a lot of interest in his work, and he asked if I would want to join his lab and just do some research for him. And I just snatched that opportunity. And then I was able to do a bunch of field work with him. So I've done field work for the past 2 years, which is like a huge hugely awesome opportunity. Just being able to hike for the entire summer and explore the forest ecosystems. It was amazing. And so yeah, going into grad school, I knew who my advisor was going to be. And Lauren was right. Once you have an advisor, you're basically in, someone to advocate for you and say that this person's going to do a good job. Yeah, the application process becomes a lot less significant after that. But in terms of my project, I didn't have an idea of what project I was going to be working on. But, you know, my advisor focuses on subalpine ecosystems, and that is what I've been doing all of my field work in. And so I kind of knew I wanted to focus on subalpine forests. But I also knew that I was really interested in beetle outbreaks and wildfire and how those two things interact and shape our forests and the distribution of our forests. So, you know, incorporating a spatial way of thinking about these systems. So yeah, you know, after doing a lot of reading of just different papers and all of that jazz, I kind of refined my interest and we were able to develop a question. So yeah, that's kind of been my process.
Mm-hmm. And just to add my 2 cents, so I'm ancient. I went to grad school many years ago. You might not have even been born yet, but the way I got in was as an undergrad. I had a summer job, and it was for a research project. And the research project was wrapping up one phase, and they were starting another phase. And I had technically 1 year off between undergrad and grad because I graduated undergrad and they took me on, this project took me on full time as just like a research assistant. And after about one semester, they're like, well, hey, why don't we just call this a master's? And they had funding. And so they had all this money to do this additional work. So rather than just being a research person less staff, they called it a master's.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got into mine. But I think with Jillian, Bryn, and myself, it all has a common theme of we knew the people we had in somehow, and we were able to get in that way. And then for Lauren, you reached out to professors, and it just happened that Melissa had availability. Dr. McHale had availability. And so both ways can work. I will say, if you go the route that Lauren did and you reach out to professors, and maybe Lauren, you can say a little bit about how you did this. As a professor, sort of instructor who gets emails from people asking about grad programs, make sure that you are clear and that you are well written and that it doesn't seem like a random, bizarre email, because I get a lot of those and I'm like, what do I even do with this? So make sure that you're writing well and that you looked up the person that you're writing, because I don't even take on grad students. And so anyone who looks at my profile would clearly know that I don't do research. So make sure that you're getting the right people. Lauren, do you have anything to add about that?
No, that's right. Yeah. Like you want your emails to be succinct and clear. And I thought when I sent Dr. McHale the email, the subject line, I spelled inquiry wrong because spell check doesn't spell check the subject line. And I was like, oh, it's over. Like they're going to see that I made a spelling error and be like, no, on to the next. But it wasn't the end of the world. It worked out. But yeah, just triple check your writing. You want to come across you're put together. And don't get disheartened. I feel like I kind of lucked out that it was a pretty good fit right off the bat, but you might find the perfect fit and they're not taking on students, and that just happens. They don't have the funding or the resources. So sometimes if you want to wait, you can. Often they'll be like, I might have funding next year or the year after, or you can continue your search elsewhere, but it can be a little bit daunting. So
yeah, the funding was brought up a couple times. Jillian, you mentioned it as well, and so did you, Bryn. When you applied or when you set this plan up with the person who became your advisor, what role did funding play in that? And was it secure or was it sort of fly by the seat of your pants?
Yeah, no, so my advisor is really good about, he will not take on students if he does not have funding for you, or he has a way of providing you with funding. So the first semester I was a research assistant, so my tuition was paid for and I got a stipend from that. And this semester I've been a TA, and so that you get your tuition paid for and a stipend. But that's not always the case for grad students, especially master's program students don't always get that. Usually people fund PhD, but not necessarily masters. But there are people out there who advocate for their master's students. And so, if you come upon someone and you're like, well, I kind of like this lab, but they're not going to provide me with funding, keep looking around because they're definitely out there. And I've just been really fortunate not having to worry too extensively about funding, but definitely apply for all the grants and scholarships you possibly can. I'm still doing that and applying for grants, but yeah.
And Jillian, what was your experience?
Well, I had definitely a bit of chaos come up during mine. So Mike had been really consistent about pulling funding up until that point, and he had a grant that he was pretty sure was going to come through to support 2 graduate students. But it happened to be the same year that he got tenure was the same year that NASA offered him a position. And so he decided to leave his tenureship and move to DC to pursue that opportunity. Well, right at that same time, that grant happened to fall through. They had consistent funding before that, and he had other projects lined up that he was going to continue to pursue to support both of his grad students, me and Eric Jensen. And at that time, like when he left, Jody Vogler was the one that stepped in, and she did not have as much experience with applying for funding in the past. So then it really became piecemealing this together. So initially I was planning to TA for a whole year and then be a research associate, research assistant for another year of my master's. But it ended up being that I was a TA for, is it like 3 semesters, I guess, and then a research associate for 2. But I was really just finding out about this funding, like sort of on the fly and by the seat of my pants. So it was definitely a lot harder piecing it together that way. But when you've got a really passionate advisor, they'll find a way to make sure that you get through successfully. So even if you don't necessarily, if something like that happens, right, like it's not the end of the world. Like I thought it was the end of the world. I was like crying. I was like, Mike is leaving. This is like everything's ruined. Like it's all not going to work out anymore, at least not the way I thought it was. But I think everything worked out for the better. And sometimes pivotal moments happen like that, and people have to take those career opportunities and pursue those different avenues. And it can kind of mess things up in the middle there. But if anything like that happens, definitely don't get discouraged. It's no reason to quit. You can definitely piecemeal your way through it too.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about skills. So you all went to grad school and used GIS and geospatial a ton in grad school. When you got to grad school, do you feel like you were ready, geospatially ready? Did you have the skills? What did you take in undergrad that got you ready for it? What are you really glad you had? What do you wish you had but didn't, that you had to learn once you got there? That's a lot of questions in one. Who wants to go first? How about Lauren? Or Jillian, you unmuted. Jillian.
I'm ready to jump in on this one.
Sure.
So I think one of the most important things that I did during my undergraduate is I took a graduate level remote sensing course to get started and working with remote sensing data, and also an internship at the Geospatial Centroid at the same time. So gave me opportunities to start practicing those skills. Learning ArcMap is a fundamental, or QGIS is the free version if you don't have access to ArcMap at home. Having at least the visual understanding was really important for beginning to work with that type of data, because by the time that you move on to some of these larger data sets and working with more intensive processing, and it's all code and it's all in a for loop and it's all tucked together nicely, it's really hard to visualize what's going on. So at least having a good fundamental understanding of ArcGIS was something that really helped me. And I would say during that same time, when I took a class that involved some R coding, they handed us the R code, but I took it upon myself during that time, since I was in this graduate level course, to actually write out my own R code to complete the same objective. So then I would cross-reference it with the code that I was handed. And use that code as more of a supplement instead of a given. It was definitely hard. I mean, I sat down the first time to learn this by myself, and I tried to set a working directory with R, and I took 2 hours. I was crying and it was a mess, and I was just like, why is this not working? It's one line of code. Like, it was handed to me, this should work. I mean, you learn little things about like how if someone writes code on a Mac and then you try and copy it and run it on a PC, you're going to have to change the quotations because those are different. Had no idea, but I would say having the time to practice some of those skills and really get my hands into coding was probably the most important step to take. Because once you start learning how to code in one software, then that allows you to start touching other softwares as well. R and Python, while they're different, they're still very similar, and those concepts still apply, and those same methods you learn for troubleshooting code like that are universal across. So really beginning to understand that structure and how coding works and what that data looks like when you're displaying it visually, I would say those were the most important tools for me.
Thank you. Bryn, you want to go next?
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, GIS was incredibly daunting. Even after I had taken Beth's intro class, and she does a great job, you know, nothing against her. But yeah, I mean, I always thought that it was a really daunting tool, and you could do really cool things with it. But I found that the more I worked with it, the easier it got. So, you know, the more that I was like thrown out onto my own to figure out, how do I build this model? How do I do this? How do I do this? And then looking things up and, you know, kind of piecing it together yourself, you learn so much. It's crazy. I'm like so comfortable with GIS at this point. Mostly, I mean, you know, I took a couple intro classes in my undergrad. And then I took a Python coding with Beth last semester. That was incredibly useful. But I found that the stuff that sticks with me the most is from what I've done on my own, and really just like working through the process and struggling and wanting to cry. I get that a lot. You just have some bad days with GIS, but, you know, just like continuing the process. I would agree that coding has been an incredibly useful tool, you know, starting early and being able to take those coding classes for GIS, so useful. And I think I'm in the same class that Jillian was talking about with R coding. They do kind of like hand you that code. And so I'm not a star quite as much as she is, so I don't write my own code for that. But it is really useful, and you know, keeping those notes and making sure that you can go back and cross-reference them is really, really helpful. So that's been kind of my experience with it, is just really like struggling through it on your own. You tend to learn the most from it. But
Can you tell that to all my 322 students who want to cry right now? That's on the project.
Yeah, no, I get that.
You guys are rock stars. I might have had 2 people wanting to cry today.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And I think that, yeah, you know, I think like after I took my first GIS class, it wasn't something I saw myself wanting to do a lot of, but the more you do it, the more you learn to enjoy it. So, yeah.
Lauren, anything to add on skills?
Yeah, pretty much an echo chamber. Definitely the coding. I would say GIS maybe came a little more naturally. I'm a pretty visual person, so the fact that it's point and click it resonates with me. But the coding, I took like the one line of code that doesn't work, and you're like, oh, I can't figure it out. But it is really often about the time putting into it, just like Jillian and Bryn both said. And I would say a big thing too is like learning the jargon and the language. Like now, when you know it, then you can Google anything. I spent hours Googling error codes and whatnot. But when you're first starting and you don't really know even what to call it, or like how to search an error code, it's really difficult. But once you get the language down of R, of Python, of ArcPro, whatever you're using, there's so many resources online that can help you through. So
Yeah, those online forums are so useful. Don't shy away from online forums, because there's people that are really brilliant and they provide a lot of useful information on those. So I can spend a lot of time on those. But.
Yeah.
All you have to do is take your question and type it into Google search and then type Stack Exchange right after that. That's 90% of my job. That was how I figured out how to start doing work in Mike's lab when I was an undergrad. I had no idea. That was how I learned how to for loop, and that's how I learn everything in my job currently. It's not like you just know how to complete the tasks that you're handed 90% of the time. You're going to end up searching, and there are, like, just echoing here, there are tons of great resources for that. So just don't be shy, just start Google searching. Just don't sit there and like struggle and look at it and wonder why it doesn't work. Just start searching.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead, Lauren.
I was gonna say, yeah, and having friends that know how to do it, I definitely hit up Jillian and be like, can you help me with for loop? So I think, yeah, or like sharing code, I think becomes like a big thing too. If one of your friends has figured it out and they have like a nice clean code, it's like much easier to share, and then you can learn from that. So that's really helpful too, like learning from your peers.
Yeah, and Lauren, you brought up a good point before, and that's about terminology. As a beginner, you don't even know what to call things. So you'll Google it and you have totally the wrong word, and so you're not getting the right answer in any way, shape, or form. So that just kind of comes with time, unfortunately. And I always tell my students that GIS is not about memorization, it's about doing. But sometimes you have to know what the right words are.
Yeah.
So all that boring stuff in the intro class, pay attention to that. Yeah. All right, following up on skills. So we talked about geospatial skills, but what about other skills like technical computer literacy type skills or research skills? Anyone?
I mean, yeah, computer literacy is vital, especially if you're working with coding software and GIS software, because if you don't know where your stuff is and you're not clean in your naming conventions, it just all gets really bad. I think Excel, it comes in handy. I did a lot of data cleaning in Excel and CSVs, and then like time management, like accountability. No one's really like holding you accountable except for yourself. Your advisor is like there for you, at least in my experience, but it was kind of up to me to like meet deadlines and make sure I'm gonna graduate on time. And then writing also was pretty important, and like being able to read scientific literature and do literature reviews. If you're a strong writer, grad school is going to be a lot easier for you. So if you put the time in to really practice that, it goes, yeah, a lot smoother.
I definitely second that with the writing component. Writing was probably the most intense part of grad school at the end, writing my thesis. And writing has been important for getting my current job. So being able to read scientific literature, understand, like if you're making a decision about how to, some methodology decision, and it involves spatial processing, right? But you need to have some piece of literature or something to give reason or a good like sound backing to why you're making that decision at that moment for that specific analysis. That's something that has supported me all the way through grad school, and it's something I need now for my job too. My boss doesn't think twice about it if I have like listed out like 3 different papers and it's like, yep, we chose these 3 methods for this project because it was cited in these 3 papers. And when you get to the industry side of things, that's good enough. You can call it right there. Academics will probably spend a bit more time like picking through the methods and being like, well, what could we try, or what might be better? But by the time you get to industry, it's just like, oh, okay, there's sound reasoning behind this, and then you kind of move to the next thing. So I would say writing is like, and understanding those pieces and being able to think critically, like that's really the main components. The rest you can teach yourself.
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything that's been said. A lot of grad school and the classes you take is writing and reading research papers, which isn't like the most exciting, but the more that you read those research papers and literature reviews, the easier it becomes, and like figuring out what is necessary, what are the big ideas. And I would also recommend like for each paper, or if you think that this paper is going to be important, like keep it in your pocket. Having like a big literature like stash with maybe a couple sentences of what that paper is about and why it might be important to what you're interested in. Super useful for going back, especially when you need to start writing grant proposals or start writing the introduction to your thesis, all of that stuff. I would also say, and this is a little bit different, but being able to network and make connections is just so huge. I am constantly emailing with people and meeting people and, you know, building those connections outside of just campus. And mostly that's just because they are a resource in itself. You know, I'm like emailing like crazy a bunch of people about seed traps and trying to get stuff for field work. And so building up those connections and having that is really going to be super useful. And also feeling like you have that support about what you're doing and why it's important. But yeah.
So I've been asking a lot of questions. What questions do you have?
I've got a question on just your like initial processes of how did you decide that like grad school was going to be the right choice for you?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I am really interested in applied ecology. So I really want to, you know, do research for application of whether that be like management or policy. And so the next step for me that made sense was going to grad school because I knew that I wanted to do my own research someday. And you can't really do that just working, you know, as a field tech or research assistant under an organization. And so, you know, I knew that because I wanted to do research and I wanted to be an applied ecologist, that was going to be my next step. And I think I also had a lot of really strong support from my mentor and advisor at the time. So that was really useful.
Lauren or Jillian, anything to add?
So I would say that I guess I knew grad school was the right step because I didn't really feel like I had the skills I needed to answer the kinds of questions I was interested in or pursue the types of work that I was interested in. It seemed like a logical next step to keep building out that skill set and have a larger toolbox before kind of approaching the workforce. And I was not a good student when I started in undergrad. I had a really rough time studying. I nearly failed out of school. I was on academic probation. I had a really rough time with some personal things going on. So I felt like I kind of missed out on that first couple of years. I didn't really wake up in college until about halfway through. I was like, oh my gosh, it's like halfway over. But I was just starting to get interested and find something that I was really excited about learning. And so I felt like it was important for me to extend upon that and keep going since I, you know, wasn't quite where I needed to be to start the kind of job I was interested in.
For me, like I took time off in between undergrad and grad school, and that gave me time to solidify what I was really interested in. And then at that point, when I knew I was ready or it was the right decision, I kind of like plateaued and where I was in my career and kind of like how Jillian said, and just felt like I needed more experience academically to get to where I wanted to be.
All right, thank you. And Shannon, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if any of you had to take the GRE and how was it, or like how did you prepare for it? I know CSU doesn't really do that for their masters, but other colleges do.
Yeah, so the question is about the GRE in case it didn't get picked up.
Yeah, I was really lucky and did not have to take the GRE. The graduate degree program in ecology got rid of it when I was entering into, well, I actually don't know how early they got rid of it, but they got rid of it before I had entered in, so I didn't have to worry about that. And because I had my advisor beforehand and I knew who my advisor was going into CSU, I didn't do a lot of like searching outside of other schools. So yeah, that wasn't a worry for me. But I know a lot of grad programs are now getting rid of that.
I had to take it. I took it. So when I was graduating undergrad, I was like I'm not ready for grad school, but I think I will be probably within 5 years. So I took it right after undergrad while things were still fairly fresh, and it's good for 5 years. And so I use it for that. I just got like a question book and like did the questions and took it. It's like not fun, but yeah, I do think that a lot of programs are waiving that requirement now. So I don't think it's as common, but
So I did have to take the GRE, and that was for GDPE. So it must have been before they removed those restrictions. But I guess the best thing that I could recommend is just practice, like get those practice tests and just keep going through that format, time yourself, like really make it feel like you're sitting down to take the test, because it's not so much about the information that's in the test or like memorizing a bunch of different so there's like the vocabulary section, right? Like the reading section. So I like sat down and spent way too long making flashcards about like a bunch of different vocabulary terms that were just like I hadn't heard of before. No, that was a complete waste of time. Don't go there. Just sit there and take as many practice exams as you can and try and time yourself, because the hardest part is actually making the timing fit at the end, because it really pushes you right up to the end. I continuously did worse on each subsequent section. So my best sections all happened right at the beginning. And as my brain got tired throughout the middle, like those sections were worse and I missed a few questions, but missing some questions isn't the end of the world either. Like just make a rule with yourself. Like, okay, I've spent 30 seconds on this, like, and I'm still not getting something, skip it, move to the next. Just bubble in something if you're not sure. But that was really the strategy I used to get through it.
Yeah, and if you don't feel like you're like a great test taker, like I don't feel like I am, especially when it comes to stuff like that, like standardized tests, maybe look into programs that you're interested in first and whether they require it. Because if all of your programs you're interested in don't require it, then maybe don't shoot for that. But that's just my tip on that.
Yeah. All right, we have a question from the chat here from Chris. Who inspires you academically or professionally, and how have they informed your decisions toward your development? It's a good one. I need to think about that for a moment.
I'm happy to kick this one off.
Sure.
So I would say that Mike Walkowski, my advisor, was really the biggest inspiration to me for wanting to pursue this direction. But I think that he understood more about where I was at and what I was ready for than I did at that point in time, because going right from undergrad to grad school, like I hadn't really taken the time to think about like, what direction do I really want to go? And first I just saw it as a challenge. I was like, oh, PhD, like, let's try that. Like, let's just go let's send it, full send. But I think he realized that because I was so back and forth about what I wanted to study, I didn't really have anything solidified. He really encouraged me to go towards a master's degree, because he reminded me that I could continue on and do a PhD after. And with GDPE, it's pretty easy when you're halfway through actually to swap your credits, and because all the master's classes count towards the same PhD level classes. So you could just be halfway through it 2 years and switch your program at that point. But he encouraged me to go towards a master's degree, and just not really having that understanding yet, I really appreciated that, because it gave me the time to kind of go back and decide if I wanted to do a PhD later, because that's the hardest part, is really figuring out, like, do you like the jobs after a PhD? Do you want to, go into government, academia? I've seen a lot more industry jobs offered for PhDs now, but you become so specialized in it. I would say that, like, for me, a master's degree made the most sense, because it was kind of in this intermediate zone. I was specialized in something, but not quite as narrow of a focus as a PhD. So I really think that, like, having him to just help guide that transition through a really unstable point in my life. It was cool to see him make the jump from academia over to the government and work for NASA, but really he just was great at inspiring all of his students. I think a lot of us really enjoyed his passion for teaching, and it just got me really excited about the whole process.
For me, the job I had before grad school, I worked at, like I was saying, a small nonprofit in Denver that does urban forestry, and the executive director there, I was really inspired by her. She was brilliant and a really hard worker. She got her master's in environmental management from Yale. And so just, and like really involved in the community. And so, yeah, just seeing someone with that work ethic and able to also be like really personable and really understanding, definitely something I aspire to be, and kind of inspired me to be like, well, I kind of want a master's. I want to be able to be someone like that and be kind of make a difference in my community. So that's who mine would be.
Thanks, Lauren.
Oh, wow. Such good answers. This is a tough question. I feel like I'm constantly inspired by new people. My advisor obviously has been so important in facilitating where I am today. And especially with my research, I feel like I always have these really big ideas and I get really excited about the work that I'm doing. And he has to kind of rein me back in and be like, okay, this is a master's degree. What can we do in the scope of this degree? And he's really good at like bringing me back to earth, I think. But yeah, I mean, I'm constantly inspired by people. You know, you read papers, just research papers that you find really fascinating, and you're like, wow, this is really cool. And the more you learn about those people, the more you're just like, it's amazing. I was able to go up with my advisor up into the Pooter last fall, and we were like meeting with a bunch of managers and ecologists, and that was just such a huge deal for me. You know, these people are like big in my eyes. They're like celebrities. I'm like such a nerd. I wanted some autographs, it's fine, but yeah, so like, you know, finding inspiration in different people and different things is, I think, really useful, and, you know, like informing where you want to go after this, and having that kind of help you get through the process, because it is an intensive process. And yeah, I think talking with your advisor about what are you interested in afterwards? Where do you want to be after you graduate? Do you want to pursue a PhD, or do you want to pursue a government job or something else? Those are really useful talks and discussions to have that help guide you through, I think, the program.
We are just about out of time. Does anyone have a last quick question? Sonia.
How clear cut would you say like the job market is for after you have your master's? Like, was it relatively easy, you know, finding a job or potentially looking at jobs? Or is it something that is, you know, is it very clear like what you're gonna do once you graduate?
I guess I didn't really have a clear idea. I worked as a student contractor for the USGS to start off. I kind of used that to tie my last gap in funding together. Thought I wanted to work in the government, worked in the government, decided that wasn't quite the place for me. But really, I found my job through LinkedIn, and it's less frequent. They're less free. It's, you see jobs less frequently that you're like, oh yeah, my skills fit that totally. But if you're really thinking about going towards industry, I just have to make this comment one last time. Learn Python. I just like my job market would have been a lot wider if I was a lot more comfortable knowing Python at that point. Industry wants Python pretty consistently. You'll find some places with R, but I'd say that like made my job search a bit more narrow.
It's funny you should say that, because 2 weeks ago we had an R versus Python seminar, and the answer was, it depends. So it's good to hear you say that. It depends on where you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more narrow with R, but my job wants me to know R, and that's why I got my job now. So I mean, it goes both ways, but if you want the wider market, definitely Python.
Any other quick responses, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't graduated yet. But yeah, there's, you know, I have my eyes set on some type of work, and my advisor just got funding to do some remote sensing work on that. And so he's actually letting me do that. And so, you know, I'm hoping that gives me a little bit of an in, that I can then, you know, give my name later on, and yeah, but no, I don't have a great answer for that.
I was just going to repeat what Jillian had said earlier, that with a master's degree, you're not quite as siloed. It's much more broad. So if you have a sense of what direction you want to go in, it can be a narrow search, but it can also be a pretty broad search. For me, I knew I wanted to work in like nonprofit, or I was looking at like local government as well. But like within that is pretty broad. So it's kind of a pro and a con depending on how you look at it.
All right. Well, with that, we'll officially end it because it's 4:52. But thank you so much for our presenters, our panelists. Thank you. You have all worked really hard in undergrad and now grad school and the real world. And yeah, it's just really amazing what you're doing. And I know you guys are off in there ready. You'll be there soon. But
Soon.
it's very exciting. So here's proof that geospatial skills can get you far in life. There they are. And thanks everyone for attending. Today, of course, is our last class session. If there are any final assignments for the class, do them. Keep an eye out on announcements, and I will send out a couple of final resources links for our class. And everyone who was online, I wrote down your name so I can send you those resources as well. All right, thank you. Take an orange on the way out, or some candy or a cookie. Just take the food. All right. Bye, everyone online.